Dan Morgan is a car salesman who lives in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York, with his wife Jessica and their 3 children. Despite being a gifted salesman, he doesn't like his pictures being taken for some reason and prefers to live a quiet life in his hometown. Their daughter Nina is rebellious and has a strained relationship with her mother because she disapproves of Nina's college boyfriend Trevor. Kyle, their son, is antisocial like his father and likes to play video games, which Dan asks him to quit and start making new friends. Their youngest child, Max, is 10 months old and loved by everyone. Today is Dan's anniversary, and Dan asks his daughter Nina to babysit her brother Max so he can take her mother out. Kyle goes outside to play video games at his friend's house, and his gaming persona, Kill Boy. Meanwhile, Dan and Jessica are in the park enjoying their anniversary. A man posted a photo of Dan and Jessica kissing in the park. This makes Dan very angry, but he keeps it to himself and goes home with Jessica. The next morning, Jessica, who used to be an athlete, meets a travel agent named Gwen during her kickboxing class. Jessica accidentally hits Gwen during practice, and after that, they both become friends. Jessica even tells Gwen that her husband likes to live a quiet life in Buffalo, to which Gwen gives her a business card. Dan is attacked in the supermarket by an enemy from his past life. He got in touch with his former associate, Augie, hinting to him that his identity was compromised. Their talk together made us understand that Dan was a former assassin before he married Jessica and decided to have a different life. Augie told him that his former boss, McCaffrey, might be responsible for the attack. Augie suggested that Dan should go into hiding to stay safe. So, Dan ordered new identity documents for himself and his family. The attack alerts Dan and makes him aware of his wife's wish to do something adventurous. He then decides to take his family on a spontaneous road trip to Las Vegas to escape the danger. Dan gives a surprise visit to her daughter Nina. Then he goes to visit Kyle, and then her wife's workplace, and tells her about the surprise trip. Getting out of Buffalo without revealing his identity was very challenging for Dan. Moreover, Dan's attacker made him realize that they were being followed. Due to his exceptional skills, Dan was able to fool the group of people chasing him. Dan also learns that the enemy is tracking his live location due to a tracking device planted on the family minivan. To ensure their safety, Dan used his special skills to shake off the group of people following them without letting his family know. He stopped at his car dealership and used one of the service bays to find and remove the tracking device from the minivan's undercarriage. After he is out of the city, Dan, anticipating the need for discretion, insists on a technology-free journey, convincing everyone to ditch their cell phones. We all know that the reason for throwing them out is to avoid the attention of the enemy. Meanwhile, as McCaffrey and his team search through Dan's home, they come up empty-handed, unable to discover the family's destination. As night falls, the family decides to rest at a roadside motel. As Nina and Kyle are talking to each other, a young girl recognizes Kyle from his gaming stream and requests a selfie. Dan saw this, and he realized that his attempt to lay low was being compromised again. So he tells his family that we need to keep moving. A Danish biker gang attempts to ambush the family minivan when everyone except Dan and Max is sleeping. However, Dan saves his family again by playing music on the headphones of each family member without letting them know the secret of his identity. Pressing on through the night, the family eventually reaches Iowa City. The family decides to go see Nina's college campus that she is going to attend next winter. Nina, also filled with excitement, urges them to check out Southern Iowa University, where she hopes to join her boyfriend, Trevor. The family has differences of opinion about one another, but this trip slowly starts bringing them together. Dan is again attacked by enemy forces, but he also manages to beat them up again, getting away unharmed. Amidst their journey, Jessica tells Nina that she can go and say hi to her boyfriend Trevor, but Nina discovers that Trevor has been unfaithful and he has been cheating on her. Even though she is sad, Dan becomes an unexpected source of support for Nina, imparting some martial arts moves that she uses to confront Trevor and deliver a much-needed lesson. The family spends the night in the hotel, and the next morning, Dan calls Augie and tells him to meet at 6 p.m. At the diner, we see that Dan is practicing some lines on how to tell Jessica about his previous life and why they need to keep moving. Then we see Dan and Kyle find common ground during a game of laser tag. Despite Dan's earlier advice for Kyle to steer clear of gaming, he realizes his son's proficiency in the activity. As they approach Las Vegas, the bonds within the family strengthen. Dan has booked a first-class suite for the family, and everyone was very happy by this gesture. Dan meets Augie at a bar, who hands him new identities for the entire family, along with a warning to be honest with Jessica. Dan tells him that he plans a romantic dinner with Jessica and intends to share the truth about his past during the dinner. As Dan and Jessica are about to leave the penthouse suite, they tell the kid to babysit Max, not to leave the suite for any circumstance, but they decide to explore Las Vegas, mostly because there is a gaming convention happening nearby, and Kyle is interested in attending it. Dan at the dining table is trying his best to tell the truth to her wife Jessica, but fails. The kids, on the other hand, are now at the gaming convention, and Kyle is performing live. At the casino, Dan and Jessica are enjoying the game, and Dan decides to call the kids, but they don't answer, so Dan decides to go back to the suite. Upon returning, Dan and Jessica are unexpectedly attacked by McCaffrey's team. In a surprising turn of events, Dan swiftly neutralizes the threat, leaving Jessica in shock. It's then that he discloses his real name, Sean. Jessica decides to walk out with the kids, but she soon finds out that the kids sneaked out of the hotel. This forces Jessica to stay with Dan until they both reach the gaming convention and see that Kyle has won the gaming round. Dan again tries to tell the truth about his past as they leave the convention, but they are cut short again by mercenaries whom Dan refers to as former co-workers. Fleeing at a nearby motel, Dan finally unveils the truth to his outraged family. Despite their anger, he hands them new passports and IDs, declaring their lives in Buffalo are now behind them. He tells them that they have to take new identities and start a new life which bothers everyone. Jessica called her kickboxing colleague Gwen, who gave Jessica her business card when she first met her. The next morning, Jessica's friend Gwen, who had previously offered assistance, arrives in a private jet to fly them back home to Buffalo, providing a potential escape from the chaos they've faced. On the plane, Gwen's shocking revelation that she works for McCaffrey takes Jessica and the kids by surprise. They are handed over to McCaffrey, who takes them hostage, threatening their lives unless Dan agrees to his terms. McCaffrey instructs Dan to meet him in an abandoned casino on the outskirts of Vegas. As Dan arrives at the casino, he heads up to the suite where his family is held captive. The tense confrontation unveils a startling truth. McCaffrey isn't just Dan's handler, but his biological father. It becomes apparent that McCaffrey's pursuit of Dan is driven by a desire to bring him back into the family's business of killing. McCaffrey proposes a deal, promising to release Dan's family if he returns to the dangerous profession. Faced with limited options, Dan unwillingly agrees. However, the kids persuade their mother to fight for Dan. In a daring escape, Dan manages to break free from Gwen. Dan has to fight his father, so he tells Jessica to go to the roof and find some place to hide. With the help of Kyle, who is now operating a drone, Dan fights off his enemies. McCaffrey orders his mercenaries to capture Dan, setting the stage for a high-stakes showdown, while Jessica and the kids take on Gwen, culminating in Jessica using a piece of broken bamboo as a javelin to impale Gwen through the chest. Dan engages in a physical struggle with McCaffrey. Meanwhile, Dan knocks McCaffrey out, who is taken into custody when Nina writes an article about them. In the outcome of their dreadful experience, the Morgans readjust to life in Buffalo. Dan channels his expertise into running a security firm, offering clients valuable advice on enhancing their defenses against potential threats. Meanwhile, Jessica finds purpose as a high school track and field coach. As a way to reconnect and embrace a sense of normality, the family decides to go on a cross-country road trip. Choosing an RV adventure, they set out on a journey that holds both the promise of new beginnings and the task of dropping off Nina at Stanford.